Welcome and greetings to our honored guests, members of our diplomatic community, and friends from around the world. We are so happy to have you here with us today as we close our spring 2022 season of our A Seat at the Table Women in Global Leadership webinar series. My name is Maureen Pace, and I'm the president of the World Trade Center Dublin, and also serve as the vice president of the Drew Company. This season and over the past year of webinars, thousands of followers have taken a seat at this table with us and joined us for intimate and invaluable conversations. Through this series, we have heard from inspirational women leaders who have showcased their unique and sometimes unconventional journeys in diplomacy, international business, trade, and culture. These intimate conversations with current and former ambassadors, dignitaries, and global leaders have offered timely insights and have all echoed a common theme that women are essential for driving economic growth and social change in their communities and around the world. This program and series we present to you has been inspired by Susan Sloan and her book, A Seat at the Table, Women, Diplomacy, and Lessons for the World. Returning as our esteemed moderator, Susan captures personal perspectives and experiences from our dynamic guest speakers on their successes, overcoming challenges, and their journeys to their leading posts. Susan is an author, speaker, diplomacy advocate, and all-around vibrant woman. She holds a master's degree in global strategic communications from Georgetown University and graduated magna cum laude. Before I turn it over to Susan to start the program, I would like to express my thanks for being here as a partner representing the World Trade Center Dublin, Ireland, in collaboration with the World Trade Center, Washington, D.C. We thank you all for joining us this morning and hope that you will enjoy what I know will be a captivating conversation. So without further ado, I turn it over to you, Susan.
Thanks, Maureen. Good to have everyone in our last session of the spring series. I'm Susan Sloan, and you have a seat at the table. A special thank you to all of our friends from the Ronald Reagan Building, the World Trade Center, Washington, D.C., and of course, Dublin, and TCMA for creating this series. And the magic makers behind the screen today and always, thank you. You made this possible. You know who you are. In this series, you've heard from many global leaders who have a seat at the table, and have no fear in case you are joining us late, have to leave early. This webinar is recorded and can be found on the YouTube channel of the Ronald Reagan Building. Friends, we highly encourage you to submit your questions in the Q&A chat function. You know I take them live, and if you don't know that I take them live, I do. So please submit them. We want your questions. And we also highly recommend you join us in the virtual land of social media and use the hashtags Seat at the Table and the hashtag Where Leaders Lead. You can find our handles at Reagan IT CDC, and the other one is at Real Susan Sloan. And if you want to follow APCO Worldwide, you can look up their social media channels today as well and join them online. So this series is based on my book, A Seat at the Table, Women, Diplomacy, and Lessons for the World. And from east to west, north to south, we have interviewed women from around the globe, and women are changing the world. Statistics and data won't solve the issue of gender diversity around the table. So this is why we need these stories to understand the why of what we can do to change the system. And today, our honored guest is the founder and executive chairman of APCO Worldwide, Margery Kraus. Now, for those of you who do not know, APCO is a global advisory and advocacy communications consultancy. It's independent, it's majority women-owned, and under Margery's leadership, APCO has grown from one small Washington, D.C. office to a multinational consulting firm in major cities throughout Americas, Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. Woo. And let me tell you folks, Margery travels to all those places as well. She has won numerous prestigious awards for her work. However, most of you probably wonder, where did her story begin? She grew up in a small town in Franklin, New Jersey. She's a child of immigrants, Polish and Cuban to be exact. And she decided to go to college early and left high school during her junior year. She got engaged at age 19. Yes, age 19, folks. However, they have been married for more than 50 years, and they have 3 children and 9 grandchildren. 9. In 2019, she wrote a book about this experience of intertwining work and family, and it's called Roots and Wings, 10 Lessons of Motherhood That Helped Me Create and Run a Company. Margery, welcome to A Seat at the Table.
Thanks. You've told my whole story, so I can relax and ask you questions, I guess. But thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. So I want to start off a little bit about your background. How does Polish, Cuban, Jewish, American, how does it all blend together and create who you are?
Well, I think it probably is never more relevant than ever watch what's happening right now with all these refugees coming from Ukraine, and it breaks my heart. But I can imagine that when my parents came, they were both born in Poland, but they fled, and this was the 20s, and my mother's family couldn't get in the United States. She was only 4. So they landed in Cuba, and they stayed there. Well, she stayed till she was married, and then her family stayed. So it was happenstance. I mean, it's what people did when they were trying to find a better life. And so, hearing these stories and having my grandparents still be around as I was growing up, I think it shapes, first of all, it gives you a sense of appreciation for what's possible. My father's father was a peddler around, we were in a mining town in New Jersey, and he peddled baked goods. And, a decade later, he had the biggest bakery in the county. So, it's kind of what you grow up around and how inspired you are by your surroundings. And so, I think the blending of the families also, my grandmother's kitchen probably is the best picture of growing up with this kind of craziness. And then, in my grandmother's kitchen, the language was Spanish, because, everybody else except my mother was born, her sisters, her sister-in-law, they were all born in Cuba. So they'd start, and then they'd hit a word that didn't have an equivalent. So they'd switch languages. So I grew up in this very, I thought that was one language at one point, I think, between the Yiddish and the English and the Spanish and everything else. So anyway, but I think that is a real, it just made you comfortable with a multicultural experience. And I think that had a profound impact on me.
Well, it sounds like it did, especially from reading your book, how you've intertwined that upbringing and your family and everyone working together in your father's store really shape your business acumen and hard work and tenacity. If folks don't know, Margery spent a good amount of years working in retail in her father's store in Franklin, New Jersey. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, but the years, just for clarity, were between being like 8 and maybe going off to college at 16,
and following child labor laws, of course.
Yes, of course. Yeah. So we lived in a small town. It was 3,000 people, and as I said, the biggest industry when I was growing up, there were mines that later closed, and so the town actually reduced in population for a while. But it was the kind of town where everybody knew everybody. My school was K through 12 in one building. Not one room. The junior high was in the basement, the elementary school was on the first floor, and the high school, by the time you got to high school, you were in the top floor, and everybody, you had all these little kids running around. So anyway, the town was like that. So the store, which was kind of a general store, except it didn't sell women's clothing, but it had like men's clothing and everything else, jewelry, sporting goods, luggage, gifts, whatever you needed, was the only store in town like that. That's before these big department stores. And or they wouldn't have been in a town like this anyway. But so the people who came in, we knew everybody and we knew their preferences, and it was just one of those things. And what I learned the most out of that was really the whole value of your relationships with the customers, which I think has influenced me also, that you do things for people, and the people respect that and they expect it of you, and there's kind of a mutual thing going on. And so from the time we could reach over the counters, my father had us in there helping people, working the registers, just doing all kinds of things, because the store was open 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. And so, we all kind of pitched in. We did what we could.
And that experience, it seems that work with customer relations, clients, that really built how you built APCO, right? Of having that trust and integrity and relationship. And in your book, you write about your father giving, I don't want to say it,
credit. I know
credit,
the story
yeah.
you're talking about. So, one of the things I did, or I have done, and my husband's been kind enough to join me, is indulge me anyway, to go back to my town before the pandemic. Every few years they had a reunion, and these are my friends from kindergarten. I mean, these are long-standing relationships, and there'd be people there that would tell me stories about my dad that I never knew. And one of them came up to me one day and said, if it wasn't for your dad, I could never have gotten married. I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, your father, I didn't have the money for the engagement ring, and so he let me take it, and I paid it off as I could. And this was before credit cards. I mean, we don't realize how much society's changed, but how much of those basic values were just built on trust. And so I've heard lots of stories about that, because my father used to have, I even remember it was like index cards on people's, what people owed and what they paid. And a lot of it was almost an honor system. But people lived paycheck to paycheck, and sometimes there were special things. And so, you really learn the value of that. And it was really reinforced by all these stories about how my dad's remembered, which were very heartwarming.
Oh, well, of course. And hearing that years later and understanding what was actually happening makes you probably even value him, but also the relationship that he created through the store and clients. And shifting gears a little bit, but on the same note of values, one thing that most folks may not know is that when you founded APCO and really built it and it became independent, having that unique culture and that common set of values was very, very important and integral. So tell us more about the traits that were important to you in building APCO's culture and the values in business that you have instituted within the organization.
Well, I guess if I had a motto in life, it was to think big. I mean, I'm from a small town. I'm now running this global company, 1,000 people. Who would have thunk it, right? So it's like, think big and have passion, because if you don't believe in what you're doing and you're not excited about it, it's never going to work. So I kind of had that, I guess that was in the back of my head, to the extent I've thought about where this would go. But it was almost like, there are certain basic things that evolve, but, I think making the client success a measure of our own success, and telling the truth and being a good counselor and pushing the boundaries of innovation and things of that sort were always kind of the operating principles of the company. And they've evolved into things that maybe are more contemporary, like boldness, inclusiveness, curiosity, and empathy, which are the four main pillars of that. But there are a lot of things behind it that make those things stand up straight. But at APCO, it's one reason I wrote the book, or what the idea for the book was, people kept asking me, how can you have a company in 30 countries that all have the same culture? Because we hire locally. I mean, it's not like we send, it's not an international company, it's a global company. It's not like one hub and a lot of spokes. It's really global. And to do that, you have to respect the cultures, you know, where you work. And I started to think about it. And that's how I got on this thing about what I brought from motherhood, because the reason it works is that we have had a very strong set of values in the center. And then we've had a lot of, I call it freedom in a framework, a lot of entrepreneurial spirit once people know what the boundaries are. And I thought, you know, that's really how I raised my kids. I mean, I learned that from raising my kids, our kids. And we had a sign on the wall when the kids were growing up, said there are only two lasting things of value you give your children. One is roots and the other is wings. One is the basic values of what you stand for and what those limits are that the kids have. And then you can feel free to give them the freedom to become who they are. And I thought, you know, that's subconsciously, that's what I did at APCO. And so I started to think of what else, you know, did I bring from home? Because when I started, you know, women didn't talk about these things about what you bring from home. You mostly try to be like everybody else and blend in, and, you know, anyway, so it was a really interesting revelation.
Well, it helped you in business to have both the family life, children, marriage, and have your intellectual curiosity fulfilled. Both of that harmony of that both. And I've been speaking quite a bit to women about this, that it's not necessarily balance, but harmony, more of a circle, that they all flow together in different ways and help one another and shape one another. And friends, we have questions coming in alive and hot right now in the Q&A.
But let me just speak to what you just said, because I think for the people listening, it's really important to understand that this idea of work-life balance is not only not achievable, but it'll make you crazy, because you can't, it's not a perfect system where every day these two things are in balance. It's what you said. It's about the harmony. It's about the integration. It's about giving yourself permission that one day you may not be the best parent, but the next day you may not be the best boss either. You know, that these things, you have to really focus on what's achievable and focus on what you can deliver and be honest about it and let these things play out. But I would not trade the richness of what has come to me from motherhood and from being a spouse and grandparenthood now for anything. And I think if anything, it's made me a better professional.
100%. The richness of life, right? All of it. They create different lessons that you use in different ways in your life. That's,
you bring your whole self to work. So, you know, you shouldn't ignore the part of it that's given you your basic values.
100%. And with that, we have a question from Swami, and they say, one of the things which strikes me about Margery is her empathy, curiosity, and ability to put herself in other people's shoes. She is truly a global worldview, and her ability to see things from different perspectives and work things out. And Margery, can you talk about a few mistakes on the way and how you re-anchored and recalibrated?
Well, coming from Swami, that's a big compliment, so thank you. You know, I think we all make mistakes. And I think when you're younger, maybe you try to hide them a little more because you're afraid. But I think you have to lean into your mistakes. If you start making them multiple times, you know, you've not done a very good job of learning from them. But I think one of them is, you know, just running a business and learning about all the aspects of running a business that maybe you didn't think about or you didn't know. I think one of them I would say is make decisions faster and don't be afraid to make tough decisions, because even about people, because if you're not happy with the person, they're probably not very happy with you either. It's not a good fit, and you're not doing them a favor by not being honest and direct and leaning into something like that. And so I think these are all things I did wrong and kind of had to learn over time. I think also, you know, in the beginning of my career, I worked for a few men that if they didn't take all the credit, I could not have succeeded. So I bit my lip a lot, you know, in terms of doing things, but other people kind of maybe walking away with the prize. I think I learned over time, it's not about bragging about what you do, but it is about self-respect and feeling confident, and that for the benefit of other women, you can't operate like that. You really have to figure out, you know, how best to do it. And I think that probably the other thing is, you know, I didn't know much about the world of finance. And I think I made a few mistakes that, especially in thinking people knew a lot more than I did. And so I probably got taken advantage of a couple of times. But then I learned that I learned how to never underestimate the power of being underestimated. And that if people were going to take advantage of me that way, that I was just going to lay back and at the right moment, make sure that they didn't have the last word. I'll put it that way. So
you mentioned that in your book too. The one section about
don't cry.
yeah. So, but on that note, we have another question. It's from Raul that, they say that you're a pioneer and you launched WDC, a stellar world affairs strategic advisory firm, which they've used. The question is, what drove you to separate from a large firm and launch your own firm, APCO?
You know, I never really, for all of APCO's years, it has at times been affiliated with a much larger organization. The AP came from Arnold and Porter, and then we spun off. We're part of Gray Global Group, a public company. And then in 2004, we did a management buyout. And since then, we've been independent. And what happened all along the way is our culture was so strong that we never got absorbed into the parent body, if you will. And a lot of that was by choice. And I think that what I realized along the way is that I'd rather be smaller and in control of the quality of what we were doing than be homogenized into something where I didn't feel the sense of commitment and passion and the ability to control the outcomes. Not that you can ever control all the outcomes, but you know what I'm saying, to give it enough guidance to know that people would always have our best efforts and that we would hire people who were both nice and smart and people we wanted to work with, that we'd learn from each other, which you can't do when you're not in control. Mm-hmm. And so it kind of was a self-fulfilling prophecy because we were uncomfortable in certain surroundings and we had to find a way that we could at least succeed or fail on our own. And that year of the line in the sand or whatever was 2004. And since that time, at that time, we were a $50 million firm and now we're, 5 times that. So.
Wow. Well, you made a shift at a good time though. It sounds like that decision worked well and was meant to be that way.
I think the other thing it did is it gave us the freedom to, no firm like this gets built on the back of one person. It just doesn't. And, you can provide leadership, you can provide the empowerment maybe to other people to do a good job. Mm-hmm. You can create a framework, but you need those people as your partners who are going to help deliver the goods, who are going to help solve problems, whose backgrounds are different than yours, who will bring a richness to whatever it is we're doing. And our service is very integrated. We are very multidisciplinary and we depend heavily on the diversity of what we do, of the people who deliver the service. What 2004, what our freedom allowed us to do was to give people a future where not only we were controlling what their career path could be, but at some point we could reward the people who at the senior levels who helped to drive the firm forward with ownership. And with a commitment from APCO that, they could have stock, they could be building for the future. And, that is not something we could have done the same way if we didn't have that level of control over ourselves.
And that level of control has allowed I think the company to be more flexible in different ways, and for some of the employees to have equity in the firm.
Absolutely. And it's also allowed us to experiment with things. You know, we don't have a huge bureaucracy or permission tree. Everybody pretty much at the senior levels, except for the, finance function or something, or, that they're client facing, and even finance is client facing because there's always elements of that. And same thing with HR, IT. But it's we all still work with clients. Nobody's that kind of ivory tower executive at APCO.
Right.
And it enables us also to keep learning and to be inspired by what we do, but also to know our people and to have them learn from being part of teams. And sometimes I'm working for them. So, it's nice to have that ability to, either reverse mentor or to help bring people along.
And you mentioned clients, and I want to speak about one certain area. For over a decade, you've been in the Middle East and the Gulf region, and working in that region, you've seen many different changes. And one of our audience members today, Carrie Douglas, is curious about this work and wants to know how you describe APCO's work in Saudi Arabia specifically, and the impact in transforming its economy and culture and the areas, especially with women.
So the work that we do in these other countries is no different than work we do. It's just maybe more of an emphasis on certain things. And in Saudi Arabia, we've been fortunate enough to be able to partner with some of the people that are creating the new future, the businesses for the future. They some of these giga projects, as they call them, really building on the vision for 2030. And so we've been able to help create advisory boards. We've been able to help, so that brings new talent, new experiences into the country, and the country to benefit from that kind of exchange. What people don't realize is really how many people from Saudi Arabia were educated in the US, and there's a natural kind of affinity when it comes to that. And probably the biggest surprise for me going there, even 4 or 5 years ago, is the progress. Saudi Arabia's always had a lot of smart women, whether they have had a seat at the table or whether they have been working side by side, has evolved. And now it's amazing how much these women have contributed to the growth and development of the country. And some of the smartest women I work with in the world are there. And we have very, and in the Gulf in general, and we have very, what I want to say, very defined stereotypes that we apply to women in the region, which could not be further from the truth.
Give us an example of one.
I think when you think about women wearing abayas, I don't think you think about assertive women with PhDs who could, who can run anything you put in front of them. And that's a good example. I think that, we don't judge a book by its cover, right? So that would be one for sure. And, and I think that the men in the places where I've seen the men and women working together, where there are clients, the men are really promoting the women, and they're very, I won't say they're deferential, I'd say they're teammates. And it's some of the, I enjoy the work we're doing. I feel we're helping, and but we're learning. And I think that's the best combination of all.
I've had a similar experience in the Gulf as well. When I was working in the UAE for a little bit, I met with an executive who ran an entertainment and communications firm, and she had her abaya on. And I slid up to her after the meeting. I said, "Do you care that you have to wear this?" Or she's like, "I love it. No one knows what I'm wearing underneath."
Oh, no, I know. Our teams of women we sent there. So they formed an abaya closet. So they share the abayas so they can have variety.
Yeah.
And they wear jeans to wear. I mean, they're
like, it's way more comfortable. I have pockets, they're like, I do not want to have to wear Western clothes. You've always got to think about what you have to wear. I'm like, you know what? You make a good point. Golly.
Packing is wonderful, by the way. Very
Yeah,
simple.
so true. And on that note about women, we have a question from Monica Smiley about women entrepreneurs and how this landscape has changed in the last 20 years or so. And she's a member of the Enterprising Women Advisory Board.
And she has a great magazine on enterprising women, so she would know because she features them in her magazine. And so thank you, Monica, for the question. But yeah, I think, she knows that I also chair Women Presidents Organization, WPO, which is, with 2,000 women-owned businesses around the world. And women join this organization to scale their businesses. And so Enterprising Women and WPO have a very good relationship. I think that it's amazing the women I've met through WPO. And, you always think of women in service industries, but, in our Zenith group, which is all the businesses over $50 million, we've got people who do construction. We have people who are, in the distribution business. We have somebody who's in the recycling and, scrap metal business. We have people who have built businesses around a lot of things that are a lot harder to do than what I think APCO is. So, I have a lot of respect for these women that I've gotten to meet. And I think it just shows that, women can contribute to every part of society.
How is it though changed in the last 20 years? Let's think back to 2000s, early 2000s, late 99s. We'll throw that in there. How do you see women entrepreneurs evolving? Were they different? Was the space different? What is that difference?
Well, when I started this, I can't think of very many meetings where there were any women in the room. And I don't know whether it was just the nature of this consulting, which is pretty strategic and high level, and, or whether it's the areas where a man considered a man's world. I think all that has gone by the wayside. I think that there are, that women are accepted into many, many more professions. I still think there are some problems to overcome. I mean, you said it in your introduction, it's going to take 200 years for economic parity. What is that about? We can't do that. That is just crazy. There are so many places where women outperform the men, and they should be compensated for what they've achieved and what they're doing. And that's a real passion of mine in that sense. I also think that, this idea, I think the new generation of men have a lot to do with this. I think they're much more willing to, I don't want to call it share power, but to, I think they understand the value of diversity, and that these teams that are more diverse do a better job. And so I think that the men are much more comfortable with, at least from newer generations, of working side by side with women, and that helps. And then I think, some of even the older men have seen, maybe they had daughters or something, but they also have reached out. And they have, I think there are a lot of people whose success comes from these male sponsors. I just read Ingenui's book, which I would recommend to everybody. And, and she talks a lot about that, about the males in her life that have helped sponsor her to get her to where she was, and how they believed in her. And I think all that has evolved. It's not finished. It's an evolving story, and we have a long way to go for sure. And, you could see the backsliding. You think about the progress these women made in Afghanistan. We helped get the women's robotics team out, and these young women are amazing. But you also think about time and place, and if they were there, they wouldn't be able to continue the studies and add to the value. And I think it's proven over and over, where women are included in the economic performance of a business or a country or whatever, the performance goes up. And I don't know what else we have to do to prove ourselves, except to stop talking to the women, and only, and make sure that we are talking to the men as well as the women. who have a lot to gain and benefit from this.
Yeah, everyone does, right? Yeah,
right.
Everyone, no matter how they identify. And on a note, for all the work you've done with different leaders and CEOs, what's your advice about dealing with difficult leaders and difficult CEOs, and not sticklers and perfectionists, but really difficult folks?
That's a tough one, because on the one hand, some of the most difficult clients I've had have turned out to be the best ones, but you have to win them over, and it's hard to do that. But that's when people at least are somewhat open-minded, in terms of that. But I've had situations where, where the people that you're working for they just are difficult people. And I think at some point you have to decide if it's worth it. And there's sometimes no way to solve the problem. I had one particular person who was my boss at one point, that when he got mad, he would foam at the mouth. And
foam at the mouth, like
yes,
Reagan.
he would literally foam at the mouth. And I mean, he had a terrible temper. And so at one point, I mean, I was a little bit older than most of the people I was working with, so I probably needed my job less in some ways. I had more confidence in what I could do. And I just pulled him. He once yelled at me in front of the entire team in a way that was very disrespectful. And I pulled him into an office. And, in my book, I talk about don't, praise in public and criticize in private. I really believe that. I think if I had taken him on in public, it would have been very different. But I pulled him in and I said, what you just did out there doesn't hurt my reputation, but it sure has hurt yours and your credibility. And if it ever happens again, I'm gone. But I could do that. And he listened somewhat, as much as he could control himself. But there are just people that, people always say, did you have a mentor? And I say that, the thing I learned the most from other people is what I didn't want to be. Like I would watch and I would say, I never want to lead like that, or I really admire leading like that. And I would take bits and pieces from different people. But one thing I did learn is what I never wanted to be. And when I started APCO, I vowed I would never do that.
Sometimes those are the best lessons of what you don't want to do, who you don't want to be, and being put in those situations and saying, I'm not going to lead like that. That's not what I want to take in my toolbox.
It's not what I want as my legacy either.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes you lean too much the other way, and there is something to be learned from that as well, which takes experience to learn.
And yeah, it does take experience. And we have a question in the audience of this experience of what were some of the most worrisome career challenges you faced, specifically as a woman, and how did you overcome them? And if you were able to do something differently, what would you do differently?
I think in terms of some of the difficult career challenges, I think, standing your ground is one of them, not in a difficult way, but, you always wish as you get older that you knew if I knew then what I know now, what would I have done differently? And I think part of that is that some of these challenges that you realize at the time, they seem like almost catastrophic or life-threatening. And, you have to remember this too shall pass. And one of the things I've tried to do is to always focus on the things I can control, because there are too many things in life you do not control, and they're not your fault. So you really have to really focus on the things that within your power to make a difference. And I think that has helped me a lot in being able to do that. And then the second thing is, I think that at my worst moments, the Eleanor Roosevelt quote that's in my book helped me immensely, that nobody makes you feel inferior without your own consent. And if people are listening, that's something they should write down, that nobody makes you feel
Write this down,
inferior.
folks. Write this down.
Right, without your own consent, because that is a life lesson that, for me, from a small town, going to a law firm, everybody went to an Ivy League school. I did not. Everybody, you kind of feel at times that maybe you're just not as good, or and I think that's a woman's thing anyway, a lot of times, that we are very tough on ourselves. But that really helped me a lot. And I thought, wow, this is really about me and not about anyone else. And if I can be satisfied with what I have learned and what I can do, and if I can own up to the mistakes I've made, then I don't have anything else to fear from other people. And that it takes a while to get there, but just repeat it in your head over and over again. And when you're starting to feel like the world is against you and all of that stuff, you just have to remind yourself that this is you reacting, rather than necessarily the world reacting. And I think if I had one thing to do over, I can't talk about this a whole lot because of legal reasons, but I think I trusted some people I shouldn't have trusted, and who invested in my business at one point.
You allude to that in your book as well. If knowing that, and you won't go into it, yes, but for a lesson for folks who are entrepreneurs and business owners and running their own companies, how do you suggest they look at investors, and if they're the right fit, what would you suggest to them to do?
Yeah, I think, first of all, people change over time. And I would say no matter how enamored you are with the people and whatever their goodwill is, get it in writing. Nail down as much as you can, because circumstances change and people change. And if you don't have a clear exit strategy, or a way to come to resolution if there's a disagreement, it can be very demoralizing and very difficult. And so I would say that's one thing to do. I'd say the second thing is, a friend of mine wrote a book about this, about the different kinds of leaders there are and what their deficits are. I think it's important to kind of understand your own weaknesses and make sure that you're not overcompensating for that when you're looking for investors or partners, and that you have a very clear sense of what you need and want from the other party and where those lines are. Because I think I was very naive. I thought all investors are the same. I thought dealing with, individuals who seem nice people and promise the moon, I think that I'm a lot more realistic about that people who invest are there to make money and not necessarily to support your ideas. Although, hopefully you have a combination of both of those. Right. So I would just make sure you're aligned. And one of the things I have recently done is a bit of a manifesto. These are the things that I value in my business that I, as long as I'm in this business, never want to see changed. And they have to do a lot with values. They have to do a lot with the desire to contribute back to society, to not just be numbers focused, to actually feel like there's a heart and soul to what you're doing. And I think that if you put those things down, then when you go to look for partners, share your manifesto. If they're starting to take issue with that when you're having that discussion,
not a good fit.
It's not. And there are people who are good partners out there. So it's just finding the right ones and understanding why you're so attracted to that.
That makes sense. And that's great advice. So thank you, Margery. That's wonderful. And this question comes in from Dee, and this is about the younger generation entering the workforce. And Dee wants to know that they've been seeing folks, specifically women who identify as women, that have graduated from Ivy League colleges, and they don't feel the need to start necessarily at the bottom and take direction. And they somewhat have a feeling of being above other seasoned
entitlement.
You could say entitlement. And it's not so much, they're not seeing it so much in the men. Now, this is Dee's question, so I haven't seen this, but this is Dee's question. So how should they handle it when they're in this position? And have you seen this in the younger generation coming in?
I think that a lot of people have complained that the younger generation is more entitled and wants to see faster rise. I think a lot of this has to do with communication and honesty at the front end of, what is the nature of the profession? How much do you learn through book knowledge versus other things? But I think you have to lay out a clear career path for some of the younger people. I think that my generation, you had a job, you hoped that you'd be promoted over time and you worked hard to get there. I don't think that's the MO today. I think people do work hard. I think we have a lot of smart young people who come into the workforce. They're a little naive about some things, but I think you have to work with that. Their expectations are a lot different about communication, about transparency, about impact, about all kinds of things that even go beyond the job description and the money. And I think you just have to be able to address that and make sure it's a good fit starting out. And then it's not a once and done, because a lot of times people come in, but I think they should talk to other people about how long does it take to get promoted from place A to place B. And one thing we've started to do is maybe to have a bigger funnel at the bottom, because some people decide this is not for them. And then to make sure that that next step is not an up or out, but that people understand what the job is and time. And I think the companies that don't adjust to operating a little differently will have a problem.
Well, that's good advice. And speaking of the different generations in the workforce, given your different experiences, can you tell us whether you believe it's better to hire folks with more experience and knowledge, or has it been easier teaching and molding people who have less experience?
That's a very interesting question. And I would divide people into two buckets, I think. I think sometimes you're hiring for a very specific skill set. Somebody, like we're doing a lot of work on climate right now. And if we didn't start with people who had a real understanding of climate and of the technical aspects of that, as well as the less technical aspects, I don't think we could be credible to move forward. On the other hand, there's a lot of young people with passion for this area. And I think that passion is an important fuel. And I think there's a way to shape that. So I would say it depends on the level and what you're hiring for. And I think that I'm a big believer in the I forget what we're calling it now, not doing resume-based hiring, of doing experience-based hiring and giving people a chance to do things that maybe their resume doesn't show they were trained for, but your experience in life shows that they could do a very good job. And I think at the end of the day, we're going to need a mix of those people. And I think we're going to have to expect that we're all going to learn from each other. If you ask me right now, the Metasphere is a good example, right? I wouldn't hire anybody my age or anybody even, younger than that. I mean, close to my age, because they're just not going to have the natural understanding of the environment in which all that has to happen. So, would I hire somebody that maybe didn't have a pedigree or something? Yeah, I would, because I think that they would bring something to this that maybe I wouldn't understand. Mm-hmm. And so I think it just depends on so many different factors. But I think one thing as employers we should be open to is this idea that it takes a village, and we should have, that's where diversity in the workforce, not just the diversity in ethnicity or anything like that, but that's where that really comes to play.
Well, and diversity is generational. It's experience, it's origin, it's all of that. And something we've been talking about in this series is you don't just have gender or diversity at the table to have it. You have it to have the diversity of thought and the way people think around the table. That's what really matters, because better solutions happen when you have diversity of thought.
And we take it one step further. We also have diversity of, we do a very integrated thing. So some people may have come from business, some from NGOs, some from public policy positions, some from others. And it's amazing what that interaction does, because it lets you look at a problem or an opportunity through a prism. And the prism, you know, however you turn it, has a little different result. And so I think, you know, I think that we have to be prepared that working today is like a continued learning experience. And we should expect that from wherever we go, because even now when kids go to college as freshmen, a lot of what they've learned is outdated when they're seniors. We're going through a time of incredible transformation in so many ways in our society and in the world of work and jobs and, you know, technology, that we have to just have our seatbelt on, but have our brain open.
It moves fast, no doubt.
Yeah, very fast.
And this question comes from Suzanne Tobin of, what advice do you have for retired women who may want to start a new venture?
So one thing we did, which I'm really proud of, we started something called APCO Encore, and we are bringing back into the workforce women who have been out for a while or who have something to contribute. And we've designed some ways of working, I guess, that are flexible, because some of those women have other caregiving responsibilities and so forth. And then for women who have retired and are doing something different or doing something new, I'd go at it. I mean, just be prepared that I've had a friend with a couple, I've had friends with very different experiences. And I think one of them retired and thought they could get back into, it was retail part-time, but then discovered that there was no such thing. And it was not possible because of the nature of her personality and what she wanted to accomplish. So I think just be practical. How much time do you want to spend? How much investment do you want to make? What kinds of things do you want to be learning? And at that point in your life, you know, volunteering is also another good way to have that second or third bite at the apple and really feel good about your life and what you're doing. So I think there are a lot of different ways to address that. But I'm really proud of what we're doing with APCO Encore and the women who've come in. I think we created some opportunities they wouldn't have had, and they're bringing resources into the firm we wouldn't have had. So it's great.
When did y'all start that?
Just recently, a few months ago.
Love it.
So we have our first 5 hires under it, and then we are going to scale it from there, and then we'll take it global.
Fantastic. Well, you heard it first, folks. APCO Encore.
Here we are, right?
Yes. I love it. And I think we have time for one more question. And this one is about balance. How do you balance the need to be decisive and assertive with compassion, understanding, and open-mindedness?
Nothing is perfect. And so don't expect you'll be right 100% of the time. But depending on the situation is, one thing I try to do is make sure I have all the facts. It's very easy to be judgmental, especially when it's a horrific situation, and not try to ferret out the other side of the story, or where you have your own opinions and they coincide with the opinions of one side or the other in a situation like that. But inevitably, there are 2 sides to the story. And I think you can show compassion by really listening and trying to to come up with a solution that works for everybody. But there are just times you make a tough decision and somebody's got to, there are winners and losers in that. And I think in that case, you know, and I've been criticized for this, but I don't make a big deal. If we've had to fire somebody, we don't announce it from the hilltop. We try to help that person leave with some grace, and to, depending of, obviously this is, you know, not a major offense, but, you know, and sometimes people think that we're soft, that we never address the problem, because they don't realize that person left because they were asked to leave. But I don't see why you have to add insult to injury. I just never have. It's just my style, and maybe I'm wrong, but that's my way of doing it.
I think that that's a great way to look at how to do business, because you can be assertive and have grace and integrity and blend it at the same time and have compassion. And so I think that's a great way to do business. And our last question says, where does the financing for APCO come from?
Aha, that's easy. We've, you know, gone like hand to mouth, if you will. So you make a profit. And I've said that these businesses are very easy. There are three things, a three-legged stool. You have to have happy clients. They pay the bills. A fulfilled staff. You have to use some of the money of paying the bills to make sure that your people are on a growth track. But you have to have some profits left over to reinvest in the business, so you have happy clients and you continue to grow. So it's like a cycle. And then in addition to that, have a good banking partner, which we didn't have really for a long time because we were small, we were, you know, self-financed. But Citibank is our banking partner, and now that we're a bigger company, it's much easier to be able to secure some funding and to deal with the global currencies we have to deal with. Don't forget, we don't get paid in dollars all the time. So we have
sure don't
all kinds of complex currencies to deal with that our finance office does a good job with. But that's basically where we finance through the projects we do and the clients we have.
Well, folks, if you want to know how to finance a company, you just heard it right now from Margery Kraus. So, Margery, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your seat at the table. And folks, if you look in the chat, you can see how to get our book. I highly recommend it. The lessons are fantastic. And thank you, of course, to the World Trade Center in Washington, D.C. and Dublin, and to you, our audience. You make this happen. And if you missed part of the program today, have no fear. This was recorded and will be available on the YouTube channel of the Ronald Reagan Building. And let's continue this conversation online. Use the hashtags seat at the table, where leaders lead, and we will have a conversation with you. I'm Susan Sloan, and you have a seat at the table.